This is the Anthrobiology Podcast, hosted by me, Gabby LaPera. Every 2 weeks, I interview a biological anthropologist about what makes us, us. Hey folks, it's been a while since I've done one of these, but I have a few notes before we get started. And the first one is actually a content warning, because on today's episode, we talk a lot about animal genitalia and the traumatic birthing process of hyenas and just other sex-related things, all within a scientific context, of course. But if you are just not up for that kind of discussion today, maybe this is an episode that you should consider skipping. But before you go, even if you stay, I did want to note that I am starting to put together my 2025 lineup. So if there's a researcher that you'd like to hear from, please email me their name. I'm at gabby.lapera@anthrobiology.com. Again, that's Gabby, GABY .lapera, LAPERA @anthrobiology.com. And third, this is kind of sappy, but I was just looking back at all of the episodes that I've put out this year. And I know I've mentioned in the past that I struggle with depression and anxiety. And I am really proud of myself for having put out as many episodes this year as I have. A lot of that is down to y'all, actually. I know that I'm not always the most timely in responding to emails, but like every time one of you emails me and says that you like my show or you ask for help with something, it really means a lot to me. I really, really, really appreciate it. I do read every single one of your emails, and I know I have like 3 or 4 emails that are pending in my inbox that I got sent last month, and then I fell into a hole of seasonal depression and I haven't answered yet, but I'm going to get back to you. And this is just to say that if you email me, I will respond back to you, even if it takes a little while. And yeah, I do this for you guys, also for me, but a lot for you. And I really appreciate you. And thank you for coming on this journey with me. And I'm really excited to see what we do in 2025, what I do in 2025. Let's stop being sappy and let's get into the hyena sex. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Anthrobiology Podcast. Joining me here today is Dr. Drea of Duke University. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. This is very exciting because I haven't interviewed anyone in person since 2020.
Oh.
So it's very weird that I can touch you. I will not. That would be grossly inappropriate, but it
is good to meet you in person.
Thank you. It is like making me a little bit nervous. I hadn't realized like how much like space the computer screen gives me, like emotionally.
I could stand outside if that would be.
My cord won't reach. Could you you study lemurs?
Not exclusively, but yes.
Yes, you also study hyenas, and I also saw something about meerkats. Yes. Which is incredible. Can you give like a little self introduction? Can you talk about what are your main areas of study? You have like I identified 3. Do you want me to say them, or would you like to say them? Okay.
It's good to see what other people extract.
So there was a lot of work on microbiota, which was super, super interesting. And we will definitely talk about that. There was work on, I didn't write this down as much as I should have, but there was work on understanding female dominance. Mm-hmm. So in certain species, there are, in many species, the males are the dominant kind of players in the social groups, but there are other species where they're not. So for example, hyenas.
Yep.
Which is really cool. So understanding like what causes that dominance behavior, because male dominance is very well understood and very well studied.
I'd say it's very well studied.
Ooh.
I think it's well understood too, but it's also overgeneralized.
Interesting. I feel like a lot of, especially like anything that you do science for, anything that filters out to the public This is a huge problem in science communication. People just think it is.
Summarize it in one sentence, and then that has all sorts of misrepresentation in it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's harder to tell those stories, but it's definitely worthwhile. And then you look a lot at kind of social relationships in groups.
Correct. Yep.
Those are the 3 areas that I identified. Is there more?
They're all parts of a bigger connecting whole. So the social behavior is the unifying theme, I would say, across the different taxa that I study and across the different subtopics that I study.
Okay, what are you interested in? Like how are you're looking at social relationships, but like what are you looking at? Like how how animals interact with each other? Like what is the driving question behind your research?
So the driving question is to understand social behavior. So that I'm particularly interested in mammalian social behavior in what I would call socially complex species, otherwise known as individualized societies, where everybody has a place in the society and everyone else in the society knows who's who and where they stand. So, akin to human societies, although that's not what's driving my interest, right? So I'm interested in understanding how animals come to be functioning adult beings in their differentiated sex roles within a community. And so understanding, behavior is the interface between the individual and its environment. And so to understand behavior from a multi-pronged question, how did it evolve? What function does it serve? How does it develop? What's its underlying mechanism, right? So Tinbergen's 4 questions requires different approaches, and understanding those 4 questions in animal social behavior is what I'm particularly interested in. So the focus, so that's a big question,
yes,
right? And it has tons of components, but I'm narrowed down by studying what I call experiments of nature. So unusual species in which the female is not only dominant, but that's the catch-all term that people use to describe these animals like the spotted hyena or the meerkat or lemurs in general. But dominance is an expression of the interactions between 2 individuals. So it's not a trait of the individual, and it's not something that you can study in isolation.
Right. No, that totally makes sense. I come from a very different background. So like I've never really studied social interactions between animals, but reading your stuff, it totally makes sense that biology plays a huge role. And not just like set pieces of biology, right? Not just like, oh, this animal has more oxytocin receptors than that animal, but even things like, you write a lot about gut microbiome. So like the commensal bacteria that we carry in us can also have effects on our behavior.
Mm-hmm.
If you talk to I was just in Asheville, and I'm sure if I were to talk to some people there, they would be like, that's why I eat yogurt every day so that I'm happier. And I'm like, I don't know if it works quite that way, but.
Yeah, right. Well, that's sort of a recent addition to the lab's approach to looking at social behavior and understanding social behavior. So we have a lot of focus on mechanisms, because I think it's very difficult to understand a behavior or a phenomenon if you don't understand the mechanics of how it works. You can't say what purpose it serves. How did it come to be? So it's sort of a starting point. First, you describe the behavior that you're looking at, and then you look for its mediating mechanisms. And I think that's a somewhat underrepresented approach in the field, where people tend to say what purpose the behavior serves or how did it evolve, without necessarily having the insight into how it functions. So I start with function and then build to evolution and purpose. Yeah.
I love that. That's very, very interesting. Because of that, I'm assuming that you have very good reasons for why you study the species that you study. So, for example, why lemurs?
Okay, so why lemurs? So I mentioned the female dominance part, but it's not necessarily female dominance. That's the shorthand. And what these species have in common is a suite of characteristics that are more commonly observed in males of the species. So masculine type behaviors, including increased aggression, which is part and parcel of social dominance. It's not the same, but in many respects, it's the underlying mechanism to gain dominance over an individual, right? The threat of aggression. So you're really looking, if you're trying to understand dominance, aggressively mediated dominance, you're really trying to understand what drives the aggression. So if you're looking at what mediates aggression, for instance, testosterone, people talk about it as male hormone. Females also have it. We just have it in different relative proportions. But if you're looking at, say, androgen-mediated aggression, and you're selecting for females to become more aggressive because it gains them access to resources that are scarce, evolution is not just acting on that one feature of androgen. You get the whole kit and caboodle of all of the things that androgen influences. So other behavioral aspects that androgens impact are things like rough and tumble play, right? So you could go to any schoolyard at playtime and you will see that the little boys play rougher than the little girls. And that's an androgen-mediated behavior through exposure to androgens in the womb. Scent marking, that's another big area of my research, is olfactory communication, because typically males scent mark more than females do, or the reason animals scent mark is differentiated between the sexes. And in all of the species I study, the scent glands are very well developed, and the females are using this not just to advertise fertility, which is what people typically think of. So, and then the other thing that prenatal exposure to androgens can do to a developing female is influence her morphology. So from her genital anatomy to her size, her growth patterns, and so forth.
So if you have a mother who is, sorry, you're the first person I've talked to today and the words are falling out of my head.
Same here, but no worries.
So if you have a mother who is displaying dominance behaviors and likely has more of this androgen circulating hormones in their bodies, and they are pregnant, those hormones will also act on the fetus.
They could do, yes. If there is a mechanism of transmission between mother and offspring.
Which could then potentially affect the baby.
Correct.
As they age, and it could affect their behavior.
It could affect many aspects of them depending on the timing, the duration, and the quantity of exposure.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So, I mean,
so
it's
cool.
Basically understanding so underlying this is sexual differentiation, understanding what is the process of starting from the same starting point in development to produce a male versus to produce a female. And the main theory of sexual differentiation in mammals is that that process is heavily influenced by the fetal testosterone that the young males produce. So the SRY gene initiates the gonads to develop as testes, and then you get the production of hormones from the fetal males developing testes, and that initiates a cascade of events that differentiates the two sexes. And in embryogenesis, right, in the development in the utero, there are stages. So development goes pretty much from gross structures to specific structures, right? So the genitalia will develop long before the brain differentiates, right? So if you have a developing female fetus who's exposed to early mid-gestational androgens, that can have permanent effects on her developing genitalia. If you have a developing female fetus who is exposed to androgens late in development, in the third trimester, that will affect the brain structures underlying sexually differentiated behavior that gets expressed later, typically in adulthood or at puberty.
That's incredible. What's your main study species for this? Is it across all of the lemurs and the meerkats and the hyenas?
Yes, in a nutshell, but different aspects in different species because of what's feasible. So spotted hyenas were definitely the model that launched this whole line of investigation.
Can you explain? Hyenas are very special creatures.
Yes.
Can you explain why? I can see why hyenas would kick this off. Can you explain what makes them special?
Well, hyenas are a group of animals that comprise only 4 living species, and they're all very different from each other. But the spotted hyena and the spotted hyena only is the exceptional mammal on the planet in which the female doesn't have an external vagina and actually has to mate, has to urinate, copulate, and give birth through a peniform clitoris. In a nutshell, she's the only female who gives birth through a penis.
Yeah. It's incredible. They're such cool animals.
They are very cool animals, yes.
You also have an incredible picture of a hyena giving you what looks like kisses on your website.
Yes. My sweet boy.
Oh my goodness. I don't know anything really. I know very basic facts about hyenas. I didn't know that they could be cuddly.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of misconceptions about hyenas, but let me just state for your listeners that this is not something I advise to everybody.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah, I do I think periodically on this show, I'm people should stay away from wild animals.
Yes. They have bone crushing teeth and so that was a special relationship. I'm not sure which picture you're referring to, but I raised 2 hyenas at home, but I suspect you're referring to Phoenix, the first one. And that situation came to be because of this difficult birthing process. So in first-time hyena moms, they have an opening at the tip of, so if you imagine a clitoris that looks just like a penis, they have the opening at the tip that becomes large enough to receive an erect male by the time they're adult, they hit puberty. But it's not large enough to give birth to a full-term hyena fetus because they are quite large. Their gestation is unusually long, so they're even larger than other hyena species or any other mammal for their appropriate size, right? So that means that for a first-time mom who's carrying, let's say, twins or triplets, when the first one is going through the birthing canal, imagine a male dog. And that's what we're talking about as a sort of female hyena, because people understand, So if you are thinking about the trajectory that this fetus would go, it would normally be sort of a straight shot out. In a hyena, that fetus has to do a right angle turn through the pelvis and then travel sort of forward towards the belly button, so to speak, and then enter an organ that doesn't have the musculature of a uterus to push it out, and that also is too small at the opening to allow passage. Then, to add insult to injury, the hyena umbilical cord is too short for the journey. So the fetus detaches, and then the clock is ticking from the placenta. So it's detached. It's not receiving the same air input. It hits the structure and essentially becomes lodged inside a phallus with no escape, so to speak. And so the female has to be pushing and trying and making this happen until eventually her clitoris tears. And it has to tear for quite a distance. So it's like slicing a penis almost to the base. And then the cub can come out. First-time deliveries, because they get stuck, are the fetuses are usually born stillborn, so they become hypoxic while they're in the passage. very oftentimes the second, because of the duration, the delay from the start of the birthing process to when the cub is actually delivered, because that takes so long, the second in line might already be somewhere along the passage, which might mean it too could be hypoxic. So the second one's born could be, like Monty Python would say, sort of mostly dead. Right.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And then if it's a third one, by then it can just come out. In French, we say like a letter in the post office, right? It comes out normally because, without delay, not exactly normally, but without delay. And so this is a long-winded answer to your question.
No, I'm enjoying myself so much.
So Phoenix, the boy who's licking my eyelashes in that photo, was the second one out and we thought was dead. So what I was trying to do was recuperate his body so that we could salvage something from it. And while I was trying to think, how do I approach this mom who's going to be defending her other cub, the third cub latched on to him. So Callie was the third one, latched on to Phoenix and started shaking him like newborn hyenas do. They come out very aggressive.
Wow.
With their teeth fully erupted and their eyes open. So
it's not like a puppy. It's like because
the
gestation is so much longer. They're much more fully developed.
They're fully cooked, right? They're a little burnt, actually, on the cookie analogy. I give the cookie analogy to my students all the time. So yeah, they're not underdone. They're not appropriately done. They're a little burnt. And so very precocial and also chock-a-block full of mom's androgens. So they're very aggressive. And you can, if you take one and newly born and put it in a box, which we had done while we were giving medical attention to a mom having a difficult delivery, and that cub was in a box with a towel, and all of a sudden we saw the box rattling and it was bite shaking furiously, this towel. So it's not necessarily initiated by the presence of a sibling, but yeah, they will attack each other. And that's what Callie did, grabbed a hold of Phoenix's shoulder area and started bite shaking furiously. And then Phoenix let out a little whimper. And that was the key that he wasn't dead. And so it became now we have to retrieve him and sort of resuscitate him. And when you remove such a young animal from their mother, it becomes very difficult and risky to reintroduce them because the mom will not recognize, they will not have bonded, and the mother will recognize it as foreign and kill it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a situation here. So it took all afternoon to sort of warm him up and get everything working. But then he came home with me that night. And so, yeah, I and a few others were taking care of him, bottle feeding him, basically contributing to raising him for the first couple months until he started pulling up the tiles in my home. I remember the people that I was subletting from who lived above me, they had told me that they didn't allow cats or dogs, and they had not specified hyenas. So I thought I could get by sneaking him in, but he let out this little whoop in the middle of very early in the morning, and the jig was up, but they thought it was super cool. But when he started ripping up the floors, I transferred him full time to the hyena facility.
Where was this?
This was in Berkeley, in the UC Berkeley, up in above the Lawrence Hall of Science, on the property just aligning Tilden Park.
I had no idea. That is so cool. I live in Oakland. I don't know if we've talked about this.
You could actually hear them whooping all the way to Oakland or Walnut Creek. So we had a colony. At the largest, it was 45 animals in the hills of Berkeley.
That is incredible. I'm definitely going to go check it out.
It has closed. Yeah, it closed several years back now.
I will also let my landlord know, who doesn't want me to get a second dog, that I could. It's not in the lease that I couldn't get a hyena.
You got to read the small print.
No, that is incredible.
So anyway, that's the reason I became a mom figure to him. And so when he would see me, he'd let out this little a vocalization that is unique between cubs and their moms. And so that photo was actually taken when we were saying our goodbyes. We were transferring him to a zoo. So yeah, and I took him on the plane and transferred him and his brother, Callie, and one other male, Huckleberry. Yeah, so those are the occasions. Like, it's not the norm that we...
I assumed this was not a wild hyena that you just walked up to.
No.
Not like Crocodile Dundee style where you just like calmed the animal. That reference might be too old for a lot of my listeners.
Yeah, okay, well, it was not a Steve Irwin moment either.
That's incredible. And they sound really special. Because we're at Duke, I have to ask you about lemurs. I have to ask you about the Lemur Center
but
here.
But that's what started my foray into female dominant species. And so for the spotted hyena, they have the very unusual genitalia and beyond masculinized. They have the aggressively mediated social dominance over males. They play harder than do males, and they engage in scent marking like males, and they're the leaders, they defend their group and so forth. And so it was the only facility housing captive hyenas worldwide. And so, where do you go after you've worked there? What do you do next? And so I had already been researching, like, where would I go? What would I do? And I started reading up on lemurs, because there were these early reports about unusual genitalia in lemurs that had sort of gone under the radar. These early people were noticing all of these things and publishing on them, but then they sort of got dropped from the collective conscience and everybody was focusing on the female dominance aspect. But it turns out that lemurs have the same suite of characteristics, from aggressively mediated female dominance to exaggerated female genitalia. So there is no other species that gives birth through the clitoris, but these gals have an elongated clitoris that is traversed to the tip by the urethra in many species. And that is a very masculine characteristic. And it occurs in development through the exposure to testosterone. The shaft essentially wraps over the urethra and then zips up. Whereas in males, whereas it stays open in females. And this is how you get the urethra being encapsulated within the penile shaft, or in the case of female lemurs, within the clitoral shaft. And so that's a very masculine characteristic. So there's the dominance, which captured people's attention, but then all these unusual characteristics about their genitalia that sort of flew under the radar. And over the years, I studied the olfactory communication and the glandular morphology, as well as play behavior. And sure enough, it's the whole suite of characteristics that you see in these gals. Meerkats are somewhat different in that they don't have anything sort of unusual about their genitalia, but they have the suite of behavior. And in a nutshell, you would explain the differences between species. So in hyenas, no one else has the rerouting of the reproductive canal, the birthing canal and that turns out not to be hormonally mediated. That's genetically mediated.
Okay.
But the hormones on top of it make this masculine structure even more masculine.
Cool.
Right? It's just wild. The lemurs have all of the components that you would expect for what we call a masculinized female. So they don't have the genetic component that reroutes. They don't deliver through this organ. They have a traditionally masculinized genitalia. And then the meerkat just has the behavioral package.
Interesting. So hyenas have the genetically mediated masculization along with the hormonally mediated masculization with the physical and behavioral changes that implies.
So what female hyenas have is a genetic component that contributes to the organ itself. The fact that these females reproduce through a clitoris. That rerouting of the birth canal is what's genetically mediated.
I have so many questions. I do have a quick question about hyenas. So like secondary births, second births are presumably easier for hyenas?
Correct. Then they're like for any other species. So the cost is incurred
the first time.
The first time.
And then for male hyenas, are they also very aggressive? Are they less aggressive than females?
They're less aggressive than females. And so that's what you see in these spotted hyena society is like, for anthropologists or primatologists, it's just like a Cercopithecine primate society. They have a rhesus macaque or baboons. So they have matrilineal rank acquisition. They have one matriline that's dominant over the other. And what's different is that essentially every female in the group is higher ranking than every male, right?
Yeah.
So this is what I was alluding to before about our understanding of male dominance, because what happens is that if there's a dominant male in a group, the whole species gets referred to as male dominant, but that does not mean that every male in the group is higher ranking than every female in the group, right? And that's what I think is kind of a misnomer. And oftentimes, like in a rhesus macaque society, you might have the dominant animal be a male, but he's only there because the dominant females put him there and support him there and defend him, right? But the rest of the society, if you imagine female fingers on one hand and male fingers on the other, those two fingers are intertwined, right? In terms of the rank. In spotted hyenas, the hand of female fingers is fully above the hand of male fingers. They're not at all intertwined.
Yeah, they're not clasping.
They're not, and that's pretty much the same as what you see in lemurs, right?
Interesting.
So all of the females are higher ranking but they don't have the same kind of lineage. Their social structure is a little different and smaller, but nonetheless, all of the females are dominant to all of the males. And in meerkat society, it's a cooperatively breeding society. So you have a dominant pair, but within that dominant pair, the female is higher ranking than her mate. And then you have subtle dominance relationships. You have more of an egalitarian system in all the other subordinates. So we basically refer to a dominant pair and then a bunch of subordinates. And I refer to it as female dominance because that female is very aggressive over everyone else in that group. And then she has all of these other traits. And as it turns out, it's the clearest case in which it's androgen mediated of all the species.
It's so cool. One of the nice things about anthropology is that you get to study a lot of different things. One of the things that I studied in grad school was endocrinology. Mm-hmm. Can you just explain a little bit about what endocrinology is and why? I mean, we've been kind of dancing around endocrinology this entire time. Yeah.
Well, endocrinology is a whole field of study that is far more massive than the section of it that I look at. So it refers to all the different glands in the body and their products and their regulation of brain and behavior. So the area of endocrinology that I focus on mostly are the circuits involved in mediating aggression. And so one of the main circuits is the reproductive. I'm also interested in the reproduction, obviously, trying to understand not just the female aggression in hyenas or lemurs, but also what controls this unusual anatomy. So the main players are the reproductive hormones. And so those are the hormones that are regulated by the hypothalamus, pituitary, and gonads, and to some extent the adrenals. And so it becomes a challenge to identify which hormone exactly is responsible for which behavior and vice versa, because it's an interactive.
Right. It's a system.
It's a system. And oftentimes there's the misconception that higher testosterone concentrations make you aggressive. when in fact it could be a social circumstance makes you aggressive and that raises your testosterone concentrations. So it's a very interrelated feedback, dual arrow kind of system.
It can upregulate, it can downregulate.
It can upregulate, downregulate, and it can regulate behavior and be regulated by behavior.
And the amazing thing about hormones, because I think when a lot of people think about communication in their body, they think of nerves, and nerves really, they go to two places, brain and where they end. And there's like feeling along the way. But with hormones, it really can be a whole body effect. So in humans, for example, any woman who's taken birth control, like that, yes, it helps you not get pregnant, but almost everyone I know who's been on birth control has other side effects from it.
Yep.
Because it's not just working on your uterine wall.
Exactly.
And it's the exact same thing with all hormones. They can go everywhere.
Exactly. And that's part of their definition is that they go through the circulation. So they're carried to all parts of the body. And this was what I was alluding to earlier, that when evolution is selecting for testosterone mediated aggression, you can't just cherry pick which effect of androgen or which effect of any hormone you might, not that it's a directive process, but evolution is not selecting on just one aspect of what androgen does. You increase androgen and you get
a cascade
of features, right? And so that's at the basis of my argument that if you're trying to understand female dominance in lemurs, you can't do it without looking at the whole suite of characters. So sort of to come back to one of your earlier questions about how you characterize the things that I study. So now you can maybe see how olfactory communication plays in, or how understanding the glandular morphology or the reproductive anatomy, or more recently, the microbiome, because what actually led to the studies, the gut microbiome studies in my lab, primarily conducted by my graduate students, was the interest that I had in trying to figure out how the olfactory system worked. So we were actually starting by looking at glandular microbiome. And that's to understand the role that bacteria play in producing the signals that are characteristic of an individual and convey aspects of them about their health, their fertility, their sex, their species.
Oh my gosh.
All of these things, right?
Literally talk to you all day, I think. But I know you have other things to do. You also have like this thing about antimicrobial resistance that I was really interested in, but like maybe I just have to come to North Carolina and talk to you again.
Okay.
I do have like some kind of more general questions. Like one is, where do you do your research? Like you were at Berkeley before, now you're at Duke. Like where do you go into the field? What does that look like?
Both. So the Berkeley Hyena Project had a captive and a wild component. So the project actually started in the Masai Mara in Kenya through Lawrence Frank's dissertation research, where that sort of launched this whole area of study when he approached a colleague, the PI, Steve Glickman, to say, would you be interested in studying captive hyenas? Because I have a situation where we can bring captive hyenas to Berkeley. So that's how it happened. It was sort of an alignment of the planets. The Kenyan Wildlife Service was culling hyenas, unfortunately, but they agreed to let us have the cubs. And so there was always a finger on the pulse of what wild animals were doing. But then we had the control and the access to study the hormones and the morphology more closely. Similarly, at the Lemur Center here at Duke, there was an amazing opportunity to look at the diversity of expression of female dominance at all of those characteristics in various species. Currently, we're focusing a lot on the ewe lemur, the brown lemur, because they have a sort of interesting variation in this system, which is key, which is that they have the species most recently evolved who have lost expression of aggressively mediated female dominance, yet they retain all of the morphological, anatomical, and olfactory communication masculinity. But the males and females are egalitarian. So the question becomes not why did female dominance evolve in lemurs, but why did some species stop showing it when all of their relatives show it? So that's a question that we're focusing on right now. And then for the meerkats, it's purely wild. It's all of the animals that people might know from Meerkat Manor. So it's the habituated animals in the Kalahari Desert of South Africa, just shy of the Botswana border.
So do you get to go to study the wild populations?
Yeah, we did so it was actually the wild populations where we could do a lot of the endocrine manipulations that we couldn't do. This is sort of a follow-up from one of your previous questions, like what do you do where? Because lemurs are so endangered, and when you have animals in captivity, there's understandable resistance to do anything that might impact their reproduction. Not that this would, but the animals sort of have to maintain their reproductive integrity. So the more manipulative hormone experiments are prohibited at the Lemur Center, but they're very doable at the meerkat facility. It's not a facility, it's basically farmland that was purchased, and you follow the meerkats around as they forage throughout the day. But they're so well habituated to humans that the necessary background information on their life history and who they are and what they do, all of that was there. And we could actually pick up a pregnant female and give her a little treatment that would block the androgen receptors, and then we could see what consequences that had, not only to the moms while they were pregnant, which were significant, but also to the offspring. We also work in Madagascar, so a lot of the microbiome work depends on collecting a fecal sample, so it's sort of much easier. You could, in that you don't have to have a long-term investment at a field site. You can just identify different animals, collect your fresh samples, and do your studies there. But I do have a graduate student now who has launched a field site long-term study on these eulemur species, comparing a female dominant to an egalitarian species on all these metrics. And the microbiome features because it allows us to look at health-associated features, dietary features, health-associated features. So if female dominance is giving females priority of access to resources, are we going to see a difference in their gut microbiota relative to males, but also relative to species in which the females are not female dominant, in a nutshell?
That's a really exciting question that you get to answer. I also think it's kind of rare. A lot of people do like very, very extensive field work, or they spend a lot of time in a lab. And for you, it really sounds like it's a 50-50 proposition.
It's a combination, right? It's a combination. So we have a lab that's equipped for hormone analyses, chemical analyses, genetic analyses. We also have a growing health component. So part of the study is the parasitology to see. So testosterone in males comes at a cost.
Yes.
To health and survivorship. And so
testosterone suppresses the immune system.
Correct.
And this is one of the very interesting things. It's one of the signals of health in animals is that if they have all of these masculine features and they're still healthy, they're probably a good person or a good animal to reproduce with, because even with all of these suppressive effects, still have that square jaw. I guess lemurs don't have square jaws, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, it's the colorful, the bright plumage, or the fancy vocalizations, or the scent marking. So it's all of those features, the sexually selected features, that actually occur in female lemurs. So female lemur olfactory signals are chemically more complex than those of males.
Interesting.
And so there is that sex reversal. And we've shown in the meerkats that those females that are dominant and have the highest androgen concentrations, in fact, their androgen concentrations are through the roof. So this is a species in which the female actually has higher concentrations of testosterone and androstenedione. So androgens in general relative to the males. And those androgens peak in late gestation.
Oh.
And so they're peaking at a time when the neuroanatomical substrates underlying sex differences are being organized. So if you give a pregnant female meerkat an androgen receptor blocker in late gestation, her offspring will become less aggressive than, even if they're a dominant female, right? The offspring become less aggressive. And what we also see is that in adult females, the higher the androgen concentration, the higher the parasite load.
That
and
makes
the
sense.
lower the immunocompetence. So
I do want to just sneak in here real quick, which is you can have a ton of circulating hormone in your body, but if you have blocked receptors, that hormone has no mechanism of action.
correct, right?
So instead of giving, I think just because people don't really understand how hormones work, when you want to downregulate a hormone's effect, you don't actually inject anything that affects the hormone. It's just blocking the receptors.
Right.
So that's what happened when you were injecting these
And that
meerkats.
makes the mechanism attributing the understanding to a particular mechanism, because so in some studies, people might say, well, do hormones have this effect? So they add hormones, but those hormones can be degraded into other hormones. So you might be administering testosterone thinking that whatever effect you get might owe to the testosterone, but it could be that testosterone is it's biosynthesized into estrogen.
Yes.
And it's the estrogen that might be having the effect.
And this is the other thing, is that hormones, they don't just exist. A lot of hormones don't just exist by themselves. They can be what are called precursor hormones, so that they can be broken down and made into other different types of hormones, which is really cool. So you have steroid hormones that are precursors to other things. It's super neat.
It's all related.
Yeah, it's all related. It's incredible. It's hormones, the more you get into it, the more exciting it is.
Well, so you might be interested to know that that's another area that we're studying, is the neuroanatomy. So we're able to take advantage of the lemurs that die of natural causes at the Lemur Center. And one of the benefits of having access to captive animals is that they're checked on by the staff constantly. So they're able to retrieve animals that just died and harvest their brains. And so we've been studying those brains. And one of the things that we have found is that the central amygdala, which is related to aggression, has predicted differences in the brain centers, and that they don't have these differences in other parts of the brain. So it really is an upregulation, or not necessarily an upregulation. If you compare the female dominant species to the egalitarian species within that eulemur clade, you see the difference between those two groups, the female dominant and the egalitarian, in the central amygdala. So we're now extending those kinds of studies to better understand the distribution and relative abundance of androgen and estrogen receptors in the brain.
That is so cool.
So that's what I sort of mean about looking at this from a multidisciplinary, multi-pronged approach. So understanding the anatomical features that are associated with this phenomenon, understanding the circulating hormones, all of the behavioral interactions, how animals learn their position. So there's a cognitive component too. And then all the ramifications to their health, to their microbiome, to how they communicate with other animals. So it's not just really one focus on one species. It's a multi-pronged focus on multiple species, where the question is really driving, and it's understanding how this all works by focusing on what I call experiments of nature, looking at the exceptions to the rule, if you will, to better understand what's going on in the norm.
That is so cool. That's amazing. I do want to respect your time. So I'm going to ask you, there is one question that I ask everyone who goes out into the field, which is, what is one thing that no one ever tells you to pack, but that you, after a couple seasons in the field, you're like, I can't live without this. I take it with me every time.
I take coffee with me every time. I'm a coffee addict. I admit it. My name is Christine and I'm addicted to coffee.
Hello, Christine.
So I pack good coffee because you cannot get it in all parts where I work. And that's about the only thing.
It cracked me up because every researcher I've asked who spend time in the field, everyone has an immediate answer.
Yeah.
An immediate answer.
Yeah, I just don't function well without it.
No, I get
Life
it.
without coffee just isn't the same. So otherwise, for the most part, it differs depending, because I work in different areas, right? So I've worked in Kenya, in Gabon, in South Africa, in Madagascar, and it all requires or doesn't require different things. Sometimes life in the field is very good, and sometimes it can be challenging. So it really depends on which species I'm working on, what time of year it is.
But always the coffee.
But always, yeah.
Perfect. So I always end my interview with the same 3 questions. So the first question is, if someone wanted to learn more about the kind of things you do, like your area of study, where is a good place for them to start? What's a good book for them to read?
So depending on the area of study, because we've touched on a bunch of different things, from olfactory communication to the microbiome to health to you name it. But I think the unifying theme is sexuality, reproduction. And I think a great resource for that is Alan Dixon's. He has 2 editions of Primate Sexuality. And it's not a textbook. It's not for everybody. It's very dense, but it's a great reference book to have on your shelf to understand how the neuroendocrine system relates to primate behavior and primate anatomy. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's also, if you're interested in hormones in humans and anthropology, Peter Ellison has some interesting books.
On humans in
on
particular.
Humans, yeah. On Fertile Ground, I think, is like the most accessible version of his books.
Yep.
Second question is, what are you reading for work right now?
Well, I'm working on a couple different manuscripts as well as a grant proposal, and they're kind of all on different topics. So I'm reading widely the primary literature. So one is to update an encyclopedia of reproduction section on hyenas. So I'm trying to see what has come out since 2018 on hyenas, all 4 species. I'm working on a grant proposal for this lemur comparative study of female dominant versus egalitarian. So that has a parasite component, a microbiome component, and also the behavior component. So that's a broad literature. And I'm also finishing up a couple manuscripts on meerkats and the hormonal manipulations and development of the second generation of meerkats. So hard to pick one. That's a lot.
You're reading a lot.
It's a lot.
What are you consuming for fun right now?
I wish more, not too much time for fun things, but I have 2 dogs that are my pride and joy, and walking, making sure I walk them, which is not easy at this. I'm recovering from foot surgery, and my older boy is suffering from neurodegenerative disease. So it makes for multiple short walks in the day. So it might not sound like much, but it's a little consuming.
No, it can be a lot. I also have an aging puppy. Yeah. She's still always a puppy.
I know, right? Yeah. Oh yeah. Mine was born in my living room, in my kitchen.
Oh my goodness.
I had his mom and dad.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, thank you very, very much. And
my pleasure.
I would love to have you back one day.
Sure. It was fun.
Thanks for joining me for this episode of the Anthrobiology Podcast. If you have questions or comments, you can reach me at gabby.lapera@anthrobiology.com. That's spelled GABY.LAPERA@anthrobiology.com. This show is produced by me. Music courtesy of Chad Crouch, aka Poddington Bear at Sound of Picture.